So we're back in the shed again after a little while. It's the day after Christmas, so yeah, a couple of public holidays up my sleeve, so thought I'd try and make the most of it. So in this video, I'm going to start going over my thought process on the chassis prep, getting everything stiffened up and braced up and all of that. And to begin with, I'm going to just finish up with tying off some loose ends. So yeah, with the rear quarters, I've still got to seam seal everything up, and there's a couple of plug welds that still need to be ground down. So I'll go over how I've been doing that. So yeah, it's not the kind of work everyone gets to do on a daily basis. So I thought I'd just touch on how I've been doing it, and you know, it works pretty well for me. So all right, so to start with, I'll touch on the tool I've been using to skim down all the plug welds. So yeah, we've got this guy here. It's a little air file or handheld belt sander, whatever you want to call the thing. This thing's amazing. Just allows you to get into all those little nooks and crannies, and really minimizes the amount of heat that you put into the panel. The only downside with it is it absolutely chews through belts. So you get these little 3-pack refills here. They're about, depending on where you buy them from, they sort of vary between around the $8 to $10 mark for a pack of 3. Yeah, like I was saying, it just really allows you to get into those tight spaces and all the awkward angles that you end up getting on these panels. I'll show you in a sec, but yeah, the actual tool itself, super easy to use. Like to change the belt over as well, it's just you push it in, this little guy here locks in, pop him off, easy as that. Slide him in there, make sure it's over the lip, and then yeah, literally just spring loaded. Old mate shoots out there, tightens the belt down, and then yeah, there is a track setting for this as well, because if you put the airline up to it, this belt will walk around if it's not lined up properly. So there's this little screw in the side here which pivots the head side to side, so you sort of just run it up a little bit and see if the belt's walking off that side. You just yeah, tighten him down a bit and it'll push the head over, or vice versa. If it's going the opposite way, you adjust it the opposite direction. So yeah, super handy little tool. And opposed to the other option, which you know, I was initially going to use, was the old flat disc on the angle grinder. So yeah, I'll show you why that's not so great. Okay, so you can see all of these areas here where there were plug welds, so I've had to grind them down flat. So one, you know, you don't end up with these big blistery looking welds all along your panel, and then two, you can slide the seal back over and it actually fits. So yeah, I think I counted in this panel, there ended up being something like 125 plug welds in this panel alone. So yeah, you end up with an absolute ridiculous amount of work trying to clean them all up. I guess that's the advantages of, if you have access to a crash shop, you can use the proper spot welders. Doing it with a MIG and plug welding, it's a lot more work, labor intensive and all that. So yeah, these areas here, you can see where there's this lip on the panel, and you get right out in there pretty close to it trying to clean them all up. You can imagine if you're trying to get right in there and be as accurate as possible, and you really don't want to scuff up this edge here. Yeah, it's just a less professional finish. If you end up with scuff marks all over this, just looks messy, it's not very nice. So so yeah, this guy here just allows you to, you know, you can get right in that way with it there, and you know, make a lot of finer adjustments, and it takes off less material. It's not as quick and aggressive, I find. You get a lot more control over the actual tool itself. And then even coming down to these bits here, so you know, this one here is a bit awkward on a bit of a funny angle. And these two here are on a bit of a radius. So if you're using the flap disc, they'd be extremely hard to get nice and smooth. It'd be really easy to actually go in too deep. This one here would be a nightmare with a flap disc, and yeah. So yeah, you can kind of see where I've gotten down to here, and I haven't done these ones yet. So yeah, these ones are done. There's a couple of spots where I've got to touch back up with a welder. Here and here, didn't quite fill out the hole very well. The ones down the back are done, and then I need to take the boot off because I haven't cleaned up the ones in here as well. So yeah, that's today's mission. Get all those plug welds sorted out, and then get on a seam sealing, go over all the panels and the panel gaps and all of that. So yeah, I'll get stuck into it. Okay, so all of those plug welds are all ground down now, which is yeah, real happy to have that out of the way. Pretty laborious task. So yeah, the only thing left to do now with all of the panel stuff is you know, go around, clean up all of this surface rust and whatnot, and then I'll just seal it up with some epoxy primer. For the meantime, I've had a bit of change of heart with how I want to attack it. I was gonna prep these areas and prime just, you know, the specific areas that need to be done. Get them primed, lay down some epoxy primer, and then all of these joins here where there's overlapping panels need to be sealed up with seam sealer. So yeah, this is the stuff I'll be using. It's Sikaflex 227. It's automotive sealant. So basically that's just to stop water entry, both from it getting into the car itself and also stopping it getting between the layers of the panels, because once it gets in there, it'll just yeah, wreak havoc. Yeah, it's basically how cars rot from the inside out. Yeah, like I said, I was going to do that now, but I think a better plan of attack and what will make sense with you know, the actual timeline of, you know, getting work done and everything like that. I think it'll be easier to just seal it up now, hit it with some primer so nothing starts to rust, and then once the car's actually completed, well, once the bodywork's completed and it's ready for paint, then, you know, etch prime the whole thing, or, you know, or I'll etch prime the whole boot area of the car and whatnot, and then I can seal it up. That'd make much more sense rather than priming small areas, sealing them, and having to re-prep those areas for paint after the fact. I think it'll be easier just to do the primer, seal it, and then paint the car. It seems to be a bit more logical in my head, so yeah, I'll end up doing that. Cool. So yeah, now that that's done, we'll start sort of talking about the chassis stiffening and the seam welding aspect of it, and you know, planning things out. So I've already got a plan of attack in my head. I'll just kind of run you guys through the basics. So yeah, the main purpose of stitch welding a car, you're increasing the chassis rigidity, and that in turn is able to let the suspension do a better job of controlling the car on the road. So you know, you get better driver feel. All the, you know, everything the car's doing is transmitted to the driver more accurately, and it also enables more accurate suspension tuning. Because say for example, if this left-hand rear side of the car hits a bump or a ripple strip or something like that, you know, if that force and torque and motion is absorbed in chassis flex, then the suspension can't you know, do its best to keep the car stable and maximize the amount of grip on the road. You know, anything that's being lost in chassis flex is untunable. You can't fix that with any kind of adjustments. So yeah, so that's the aim of the game. So to start with, your main key points, you know, your suspension towers. So things like this. So the other side of this steel here is where the actual suspension mounts to. So this is the rear of the strut tower. So this panel here is actually where the suspension bolts to. So basically the weight of the car is put on that, and this is trying to flex and move within this structure itself. You know, the more modern cars are a lot better at it. They're built better from the factory, but you know, every little bit helps. So basically what you want to go and do is clean up all of this seam sealer. You want to get as much as possible out. I mean, you can even see here some of the penetration from one of the other welds that I've done on the other side. So yeah, you basically want to stiffen up these towers as much as possible to minimize flex. So yeah, you go around, clean all that crap out, and then yeah, you can either spot or stitch weld all the way around. And then down here where the tower actually joins the floor of the car, same thing. And then basically anything that ties the towers structurally into the car, and especially the chassis portions of the car itself. So yeah, you really want to maximize the amount of strength you put into that stuff. So yeah, you know, even things like I could probably tie the parcel shelf into the top of this here, and that'd just stiffen, like, you know, this member the whole way across. Like you can sort of see, goes up here, this big thick stuff transfers through to the other side. I'll show you the opposite side of that in a minute. But this parcel shelf sort of acts as a strut brace even. You know, it's a pretty solid member the whole way across, comes all the way back down. So you could even do your, you know, run your welds across there on the top of the tower, then also tie this here into the tower all the way around. It's going to increase rigidity as well. So yeah, moving on from that, the underside of that parcel shelf that I was showing you on the inside of the boot, that's the underside of this member that runs the whole way across. So that's a pretty thick channel running from strut tower to strut tower. So what I've done here is I've made this little bracket up and triangulated this area. Like, there's not a great deal of strength in this portion of the strut tower, but trying to just you know, tie everything in, and especially with triangulation. This nice little bent up dimple dyed plate here, little lip on the bottom, I don't know if you can see that. So yeah, just welded him in, and then yeah, this is where the strut mounts to the tower here. So you know, the aim of the game is to get this guy to move as little as possible, and then for this guy to also affect its neighboring panels as little as possible. You don't want to have flex put into the chassis. So yeah, so I've gone around and stitched the tower to the top of that. Coming around on the interior, you can see here, so running down from the tower, it's actually stitched all the way up around the top there. This portion of that parcel shelf that goes, it meets this panel. So when the quarter panel was off, when I did the swap, you can actually see the opposite side of this panel, so that's all braced up as well. So there's a couple of nice bars and dimple dyed plates running across there, bracing all of that, and then there's also an additional brace going from the top of the C-pillar here all the way down. You can sort of see it on the inside here. Here's one of the bars. So there's two of these bars running through here with a dimple dyed plate, reinforcing the C-pillar down to the B-pillar. And then yeah, the aim of the game up here is just to strengthen everything around the strut towers to as close to the chassis as you can. So we've tied this guy in here to the top of the wheel arch, because the wheel arch goes all the way up and then to the strut tower. And then what I'll be doing is coming through here and removing all of this sealer, and then doing the same thing, just running stitch welds all the way down here. So that guy's tied in as best as possible. And you can even go down to the floor there. And then all your members, like you've got your, you know, there's a pretty big member here that runs across the car. You want to stitch that guy up. You can even stitch the sills into the floor. And then you've got your chassis actually runs directly across here as well. So anything that's close to the chassis. And then when you do the underside of the car as well, so I'll be going over the underside of the car pretty thoroughly. So where that chassis, so the underside of that chassis rail, there's flanges and then it's spot welded to the underside. So basically where those flanges run completely from front to rear of the car, you can, you know, you spot weld all of that as well, and then all the surrounding areas. So you can see in here, there's the tower. That's where the strut top mounts up there. So there's actually a, it's a bit hard to see without the gimbal going crazy. So there's actually a lip all the way around here. So that's a part of the panel when it's pressed from the factory, and then that's spot welded all the way around there to this part. So one of the things you can do is go and clean all of this crap off here, expose the bare metal, and then stitch weld all the way around the top of that tower from the inside. And then moving down here, you've got the actual, this is the actual chassis of the car. So all of this bit here that runs all the way across and then down. So yeah, any of these seams here running across the chassis as well. So you want to stitch weld all of these, and that's just going to tie the actual chassis of the car, which is the main structure, all the way up into the strut tower as best as possible. So you're just creating a solid link from the struts to the chassis, and then that's going to transmit. So with the way the sway bar works, it'll, you know, they transmit load diagonally from front to rear. So this rear left wheel, if it hits a bump or it loads up going through a corner, it's going to transmit load diagonally to the front right. So if through doing that, you know, this is going to load up the body of the car, and if the body of the car is twisting, it's actually taking that force out and absorbing it. So it's just minimizing the amount of work that the suspension can do in keeping the car planted to the road. So you want to maximize the amount of work the suspension can do. You don't want to be absorbing it in chassis flex. So that's the whole point of doing all of this. Yeah, and you can even see up here, this is some penetration from one of the welds I did on the inside. This stitched me up a fair bit. I had a complete brain fart moment when I was doing this. I didn't even think of the penetration coming through to the wheel arch. So there's all of this factory liner in here, and then road grime and years of crap just getting thrown up here. So when I was welding this, and it, obviously the weld pool penetrated through to this side of the car, I started burning this, and it just contaminated the weld pool. Yeah, it was an absolute nightmare. Like, I just was struggling to get it started, and then it was the puddle was popping, getting heaps of porosity in it. I was like, what the hell? I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then obviously all of this burnt away. So I ground the weld back and you know, hit it again. It was a lot nicer. So yeah, a bit of a brain fart on my behalf. I'll be cleaning all of that up when I continue, and then onto the other side as well. That was pretty stupid of me to just expect that it'd be fine. But yeah, anyway, we all make mistakes. And you can even sort of see up here as well where the struts have been rubbing, they've rubbed away the coating on the panel there. So it's actually got a little bit of surface rust there. So I'm going to be painting the underside of the car anyway, so it'll be sorted out when I do that. Anyway, so that's the rear wheel arch side of thing finished. We'll go check the front out and then we'll move on to the core of the car. Okay, so here we are at the front of the car. The theory is exactly the same. Key points are where any of the suspension components and steering components mount to, and then the chassis itself, and then you just work your way back. Come up with a logical plan of attack, work out your key points, how far you want to go. Some people only want to do the suspension areas, some people will do the whole car front to back. Yeah. But anyway, so what we're going to do in the front here, same deal. There's your chassis leg going all the way to the front, so that goes the whole way along here. So there's a seam following that from the firewall all the way down there. And then that follows all the way around here, so that'll be getting stitch welded. And same deal with your strut tower where that's welded into the car, so there's a seam all the way around here up to the top, goes across. So sort of similar deal as the rear there. So that'll all be stitch welded. And then this is a little bit different on your double wishbone cars, all your Sylvias and stuff with your Max struts. You don't have this arrangement with the upper arm. So what I'm thinking of doing with this, so once the suspension's all out, I'll go through and stitch weld these brackets into the actual car itself, strengthen all of these up. And then this arm doesn't actually come all the way down into this channel or all the way up to the top there. So what I'll do is I'll remove the strut and see its range of motion. The car will only move a couple of inches either way in compression and rebound. And so, I'll figure out where this arm's range of motion is and how far this portion of the arm will actually come down into this channel. And then I'll make a plate up to go in here with dimple dies in it. I'll probably scallop the top a little bit like this just for a little extra clearance, just in case the wheel, reaches full droop and things like that. It'll have clearance. It's not going to bind up on anything. But then, yeah, so I'll have the bracket here, and then there'll be a plate, or not a bracket, the plate itself will be welded into that channel the whole way down. There'll be dimple dies in it, strengthening the plate itself. So there's that on both sides, on the front and back side of the steering. So there's that, and that'll be all the way up to the top there as well on both sides. So that'll be completely boxed in and as strong as possible. So any movement that the suspension's going to have or the steering's going to have an effect on the car, it's all going to be transmitted directly into the chassis, not into flex. So yeah, that's probably it for this this wheel arch here. I mean, it's the same sort of theory the whole way. You just end up getting, it's a bit repetitive after a while, but this seam here running all the way down, and so this chassis leg here runs all the way under the car, so that'll be getting reinforced and stuff. I'll go over the underside of the car stuff in more detail when I get to that, because I'll be doing some reinforcement to the actual chassis itself as well. Yeah, that's probably it for the wheel arch, just having a quick look, just going over it in theory. So we'll move to the center of the car now. I should also mention that the same theory applies in the engine bay, with the engine bay side of the strut towers and then the chassis and everything in there. I've still got the engine in the car and all of this crap on the bonnet, so I'm not going to bother about going over that, but it's basically the same as the rear. Okay, so I've touched on this in a previous video as well, but the hardest part of the car to get chassis flex out of is this center portion of the car. You've got a huge hole in the car here for a door, and then you've got a floor pan, and that is it. You've got your pillars and stuff, and then your strut towers either end. So yeah, this is where a lot of the flex happens. I'm assuming most people that have messed with cars would have jacked the car up from the front or the rear, and then you go to open one of the doors, you've forgotten something, left it in the car, need to get it out. And you'll either struggle to open the door, or you'll get the door open and you won't be able to close it. And that's because the actual chassis flexes so much that where the door comes into the strikers, it's actually moved. The whole car is actually corkscrewing in the center. So yeah, it's actually surprising how much cars move around. So yeah, that's probably one of the more obvious examples that most people would have encountered is jacking the car up and being unable to open or close the door properly. So yeah, this center section of the car here, without putting a roll cage in it, it's extremely difficult to minimize flex. You can do your best forward, like near the strut towers, front and rear. This center section's a bit more, I'd say it's a bit more involved. There's a bit more thought needs to be put into it, perhaps. And you're never ever gonna get it to be as good as having a roll cage in the car. Like if you put a full roll cage down to the A-pillars, proper roll cage all gusseted to the chassis, that is by far the best way of minimizing flex. Like you're literally tying every part of the car together. But this being a street car, I really don't want to run a cage in it. I'll run a half cage if I have to. I'm still unsure about that. I don't really want to mess the interior up by putting a roll cage in it, but yeah, anyway, so the main part of this, the goal of this, is being able to stiffen everything up without having a roll cage. So one of the things I'm looking at doing, and I'll be the first to put my hand up and say I take inspiration from all sources. This is actually something I've seen from a Japanese workshop called Opera Performance. So what I'm planning on doing here is triangulating the inside of the car. So the floor pan, crossing the chassis, tying it into the center of the car there, and then up the front. And basically just creating as much triangulation as I can across the floor and then tying it into the chassis. So what I'll end up doing is, I'm going to run this 20mm diameter tube through the center of the car. This one's too long, so it's not sitting as low, like it'll end up sitting on the floor. So yeah, this will end up sitting level with the seat mounts. So then there'll be enough room for the carpet to go back in over all of this, so it's not going to look, it's not going to look shit house. But you can see here, excuse the mess, there's crap everywhere still, but there's these two little studs here. So they actually go under the car, and then there's a bracket that goes from this side of the trans tunnel to the other side of the trans tunnel under the tail shaft. So that's a key point. So I'm probably going to make a little base plate up that'll just sort of spread some load in here, and then this will sit on the base plate and it'll be welded to it. And then the same up this end. I'll have to trim this little bit that the plastic goes in so the wiring sits as it's supposed to. And then that'll be welded in there. This will basically be flat against the floor, so I'll do a couple of little stitch welds across this to the floor of the car. And then, like I said earlier, this is where the chassis runs, this portion across here. So this guy is going directly over the chassis. So it'll be stitched to the floor here on the chassis rail itself. And then sort of using this as a bit of a display. So I'll be running, this isn't a final size at all, this is just an offcut that I had laying around. But I'll be triangulating this tube to the floor of the car also with some braces like this. And then I'll drill holes and do dimple dies all the way through that. So it'll be as light and as strong as possible. So yeah, we'll be going from this point here, which is a part that Nissan already used for reinforcement under the car. And then we'll be running it all the way across here into the sill panel, which is a pretty sturdy part of the car. And I'll also be doing the same from the reverse side, mind all this crap. So yeah, it'll be going from here right up to the front of the tunnel as well. And there'll be a base plate welded up there, and then you can see where those two holes are is the chassis as well, so it continues along through here. So yeah, once that tube's welded across there, it'll be tied into the chassis, reinforced and everything like that. So I think that's going to be the absolute best chance at minimizing chassis flex without putting a roll cage in it. Yeah, and then Nissan also do a fairly good job of putting these, they got these factory braces here as well that also tie the floor pan up into the pillars. So yeah, I think with all of that combined, that'll be as good as I can get the car without putting a roll cage in it as far as chassis stiffness goes. So yeah, that's the plan anyway. So I'm not going to get stuck into that now. I'll leave that for the next video. I'll probably do like 1 or 2 videos. Actually, it's going to be spread out over a while because I'll have to wait for like subframes to come out before I can do the underside of the car. The engine will need to come out before I can do the engine bay. So yeah, there'll probably be a couple of episodes on doing this sort of work, sort of spread out all over the place. But so yeah, that's the goal anyway. Try and stiffen the chassis of the car up as much as humanly possible without the addition of a roll cage. So that's my thought process on it anyway. I'm not a chassis engineer or not into any high level motorsport at all. So this is just sort of what I've learnt along the way and my thought process on the situation. So if anyone's got any hints and tips or actual personal experience, I'd be very keen to hear it. All ears when it comes to picking up as much info and learning as much as possible. So yeah, I'd be keen to hear some thoughts on anybody. If anyone's watching this that actually has some real world experience, I'd yeah, be keen to hear your input. But yeah, and then getting onto the finalising side of things with the actual paint of the car as well. So once the whole car is stitch welded front to back and braced up and reinforced and all of that, all of those seams will then be sealed up with that seam sealer. A lot of race cars that are just purpose built for the racetrack, they won't do that. They'll just clean all the crap off, spot weld it, paint the car, and then, you know, it just sees the racetrack only, and then it sits in a shed. This car being a road car, and I want to make it last as long as possible, I'll be doing my best to seal everything back up after the fact. Because yeah, last thing I want is this car developing rust issues in, you know, 10 or 15 years time. Yeah, so that's probably enough for me just absolutely rambling and talking crap. If anyone's still watching the video, thanks for making it this far, really appreciate it. And God, I suck at finishing these videos. Talking to a camera is really not my forte. Say the same repetitive crap time and time again, but yeah, I really do appreciate people actually taking the time to watch this stuff. It's, like I said, it's just me faffing around with my car in the shed. So yeah, thanks a lot, and I'll catch you on the next one.